Welcome to the Core Women Podcast, the place for women entrepreneurs, authors, and self-starters looking to build community and gain valuable insights through expert interviews with women at the top of their game. Join your host, podcaster, producer, expert coach, entrepreneur, and author, Dr. Summer Watson, as she aims to inspire and empower you through these candid conversations. Lean in and embrace the journey. It's time to start the show. Here's your host, Dr. Summer Watson.
Today on the show, I would like to welcome Malissa Smith, who is an author, women's boxing historian, and public speaker. Melissa's journey in boxing began in 1997 when she first entered the world-renowned Gleason gym in Brooklyn, New York. Since then, boxing has become her muse and passion as she chronicles women in sports. Melissa began writing about the women of the ring by creating her blog, Girl Boxing, in 2010. And having gone back to university, she obtained her master's in liberal studies with her thesis, Boundaries in Motion, Women's Boxing. Her latest book, The Promise of Women's Boxing, A Momentous New Era for the Sweet Science, will be published in June of 2024. We have so much to talk about, Melissa, so let's jump into the ring and let's get ready to chat. And welcome.
Thank you so much for that beautiful introduction. I so appreciate it. And I'm here ready to chat.
Ready to chat. You know, I had to use some of that stuff that's used in boxing. So are you ready? Are you ready for this?
I am ready for this and ready to go all 10 rounds and so happy to be here with you.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here with you as well. So before we shift into your expertise in the era of boxing and the history of the sport, if you could describe your journey in one word to this point, what would that word be and why?
I would say perseverance. And the reason is that, my journey has been very circuitous. I've had a lot of pitfalls, a lot of starts and stops, but I just keep going with the idea that I will get there at some point in time. And I'm still in that process of becoming, even though I'm going to turn 70 next month. It's a process, and hopefully I just can keep going from there.
Well, I love that. It's always a process. It's pursuing a passion, and that is something that you're doing. And yes, it's resiliency, it's courage, it's challenge, it's success, it's all of that. You've taken an interest in a sport that over the decades has really been male focused, and yet you've studied it from a woman's perspective, and it's also about women. So let's talk about some of the milestones that sparked your interest in the area of boxing. Once you stepped into the renowned Gleason gym, you became very enamored with the sport. What initially appealed to you about checking out the gym?
Well, I had always loved boxing, even from being a little kid. I grew up on Manhattan's Lower East Side. It was rough and tumble and kids would fight. You always knew somebody who had the science, who really knew what they were doing, because they never got hit. They were ducking out of the way, and they had an economy about the use of their body. And I always found that attractive. And then the big boxers of the day was Muhammad Ali, and I remember watching him on ABC's Wide World of Sports and listening to Howard Cosell as an announcer. And it just really piqued my interest in the sport. I always appreciated the versatility of a fighter in the ring. It just never occurred to me that I could do it for decades. And then finally I said, you know what? This is crazy. Of course I can box if I want to box. So I went into Gleason's gym, kind of like a New Year's resolution in January of 1997. I was 42 years old. I said, I am determined. One day I want to look at myself in the mirror and watch somebody who knew how to throw a jab. And that's what I did. It was very, very exciting.
How cool. I love that story, and that it was part of the culture you grew up in. And then you shifted that into your own personal interest. And I remember those days. I'm 55, but I remember my dad turning on the TV and us watching Howard Cosell. He'd talk about Muhammad Ali and us watching Muhammad Ali. I love that, you kind of grew up in that culture. These are your memories, some of the milestones, and you took the path of really cultivating that journey by stepping into that gym and saying, I can do this. I can do this too. Not only are you physically present within the sport, but you've also studied the evolution of women's boxing, both in terms of recognition, opportunities within the sports, and other things. So talk about that. Talk about women's evolution in the sport.
Absolutely. Well, the first thing that really struck me when I started at Gleason's in 97 was the number of women who were training alongside me, whether it was 7:30 in the morning or if I came in the afternoon or the evening, there were always women in the gym, and that intrigued me. And I was like, well, wow, I'm not the only one, but more to the point, these are women who are having success. They're competing in the amateurs and the Golden Gloves. They're starting to become professionals fighting in a totally unknown world to me. And that began to pique my interest. And then as I thought about going back to school, I thought, well, geez, why don't I kind of marry those two things together? I'm really interested. I'm studying history. I'm really trying to find my way as a historian. So let's tease this area that nobody's really written about. There was no history of the sport, for instance, until I published a book about it. So it was very intriguing. And I also was intrigued to tell the stories of the women around me. A fighter like Alicia Ashley, who came from Jamaica. She had originally been a ballet dancer. That path was closed to her due to an injury. She ended up kickboxing, found her way to boxing, became a champion, all before the Olympics ever happened, was instrumental in being one of those boxers that proved that women could really fight, that they could fight as well as a man. It wasn't a gender-based thing, but it was really just you either have the skills of a fighter or not. Mm-hmm. And she has gone on to become only the third woman to be inducted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame, which is this really exciting benchmark for women in the sport. And she is alongside Christy Martin, who became very famous in 1996 when she fought on the bottom of a Mike Tyson card and, ended up fighting an Irish fighter named Deirdre Gogarty, who had to come to America to box because it was illegal in Ireland, illegal in England, came to the United States, ended up fighting on this card. And it was the fight of the night. It was a Don King pay-per-view. Don King is that very famous impresario who started off with Muhammad Ali and kept going and pushing the envelope. He supported and signed Christy Martin. They had this fight. The next thing you know, it's 1996, and she's on the cover of Sports Illustrated magazine. Now, it always struck me that I walked into the gym a year later, and I hadn't even heard of her. Wow. So there was just this synergy of energy of people saying, you know what, it's 25, 30 years since we were burning our bras. We can take over the gym. It's okay. And I wanted to tell those stories. I wanted to tease out what it was that prompted women to want to do it. And secondly, what the challenges were that they had to face.
Well, I love that you say that, because my next question is, what unique challenges do female boxers face in comparison to their male counterparts, both inside and outside the ring?
That's a big question.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of challenges. I mean, you can go era by era, but let's go backwards. Let's talk about today, 2024. We're recording this in the middle of May. And women have been in the Olympics since 2012. So this is 12 years since they've been in the Olympics. There are two women, a woman named Katie Taylor from Ireland and a woman named Amanda Serrano, who's Puerto Rican by way of Bushwick, Brooklyn, who were 2 years ago, almost to the day, the main event at Madison Square Gardens Arena and sold out the place. This is the house of Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier. It has become the house of Katie Taylor and Amanda Serrano. They had this extraordinary fight. And for the first time, both women earned $1 million. Oh, so we think, oh my God, that's amazing. That was 2 years ago. One would have thought there'd be all these other fights for $1 million. Well, that hasn't happened. The challenge is who's promoting fights. The challenge is who has money to promote them. We have promoters in the United States, major promoters, who refuse to put women on their boxing cards. What are you going to do? How do we overcome that? How do we overcome the challenge of payment for fights? $1 million is 1/50th of what Canelo earns in a boxing fight. He earns $50 million. Katie Taylor earns $1 million. Amanda Serrano earns 1 million. Clarissa Shields earns 1 million. Clarissa Shields being the first American boxer, male or female, to actually win a gold medal in back-to-back Olympics. So that's just the beginning of what those challenges are. And women who are struggling to become champions, they're fighting God knows where for $800 a round, $900 a round, $1,000 a round. There are women that I write about in my book, my upcoming new book, The Promise of Women's Boxing, where, they're on a championship fight, they're on television, they're earning $10,000 or $20,000, which doesn't cover anything. They have to give a third to their corner. It doesn't cover their training. It doesn't cover a thing other than a little bit of money, which they use to basically pay off their gym fees and everything else.
Yeah, and continuing to promote themselves because nobody else is. It's sad because we've got these incredible, talented women in the sport, and yet they're not being supported. It's not an easy thing to do. There's a lot of physicality to it. There's a lot of mental focus and mindset to this. There's a lot of habits and practice to this. There's so much that goes into this. How does one make it when they're passionate about a sport like boxing, especially women that aren't getting the same type of support that maybe men do?
Well, that's a great question. And what I have found in terms of, the research that I've done and in women that I know in the sport, the spark is what keeps them going. It is that passion. They're not there to beat up somebody. They're there to, in essence, a challenge to themselves to be able to make it as a boxer. In the same way that I was, I want to look in the mirror and see a champion, to see someone who has really persevered and been able to enact all the things they need to look and be a boxer. And they also have to take control of their own lives. They're doing their own media. If you look on social media, there's boxing Twitter, there's boxing Instagram, there's boxing Facebook, where there's this community of women that are constantly in discussion with each other. There's also boxing media folks who are there, journalists and podcasters, you name it, they're all on there. And they're always talking and chattering and chatting, the 10 rounds of chattering. But it's also how fights can be made at times. So number one, it's understanding that boxing is a business. And once a woman understands that boxing is a business, then they have to approach it as any entrepreneur approaches a business. Who am I? What's my brand? What am I selling? How am I going about getting the opportunities that I deserve? I'll tell you a story. Heather Hardy, Brooklyn, New York, tough as they come, a true Irish New York fighter. Just always, her defense was her offense, but she so savvy, so smart, was only the second woman to appear on HBO. And the way she appeared on HBO, she was having her first major world title bout with a woman named Shelley Vincent. This was their second outing, their sort of Shelley Hardy Vincent 2. It was really touted as one of the great fights. It was going to be at Madison Square Garden's Little Theater. It was going to be sold out because they were selling all the tickets, because half of the people there were for Heather Hardy, the other half were for Shelley Vincent, who lives in Rhode Island. And, it had buses of people coming down to watch her fight. Going to be on HBO. The only real title fight on this show. And they weren't going to put him on television. And Heather Hardy said, no, I'm done. She called the head of the HBO boxing and said, you got to put us on. This is crazy. I refuse to accept that you're not going to put us on the air. Well, the next day, her promoter, a guy named Lou DiBella Entertainment, one of the few early supporters of women in the sport, calls her and says, Heather, what did you do? And she's like, oh my God, he's going to kill me. And he says, well, it worked.
Yeah.
And she got herself her fight with Shelley on HBO. And it was incredibly meaningful for her entire career to have been able to achieve that. She would not have done that. It would never have happened if she hadn't known who she was and said, damn it, I'm going to do this. I am going to make this happen. And she did. That's really what it's all about.
Well, I love that she took that approach. She had that courage to initiate and insert herself. It was not just momentous for her, but also for her opponent. So she was supporting other women boxers out there by doing what she did. these women who are in boxing are also paving that way for others that want to come after them. And my question to you too is, we have so many male boxers out there who are doing very well, who get these promoters and these promotions and these sponsors and these different folks to promote their fights on TV. Are they working as allies with these women?
Not a lot. Some, it's not the focus, frankly. I mean, for instance, if you have a card with a male fighter who's one of the promoters who has enough juice to promote the fight themselves, they can also say, and I insist on having a woman's bout. That does not happen very often. Believe it or not, Jake Paul, the Instagram guy, is one of the few promoters who actually does that. Most Valuable Promotions is the company he created. I mean, some of this is vanity for himself. He's about to fight Mike Tyson. But the way he came to represent Amanda Serrano was he was doing a fight on Showtime when they still had boxing. And he said, you know what? I'd like a woman's bout on my card. Who do you recommend? Well, Amanda Serrano was recommended to him. She trained some of the time out of Puerto Rico. That's where the card was going to be. So anyway, they meet, they were training, and he's like, I love this woman. Where have you been? How come I never heard of you? She performed on the card. She was a miracle on the card. You know, she's a great boxer.
Right.
Has one of the hardest hitting body shots in the sport, male or female.
Wow.
Eventually, she signs with him. And it's the reason why, you know, she appeared in Madison Square Garden for $1 million, because they said, we're not doing this for less. We refuse to do this for less. Since then, his next big fight is with Mike Tyson, you know, which has gotten a lot of press.
Yeah.
You know, okay.
Right.
I won't even go there in terms of my feelings about it. But the co-main event is Amanda Serrano and Katie Taylor fighting each other for the second time. Now, here's the real kicker. Katie Taylor's payday is reportedly $6 million. So she's gone from finally making $1 million to $6 million. And that's because of Most Valuable Promotions. Nobody else is giving you $6 million, of giving any women anywhere near that. Or a person might earn $250,000 as the A side of the card, but their opponent on the B side is getting $30,000. So very, very, very unfair. Extremely difficult to earn a living. And I will add that many women in the sport are mothers. Like Heather Hardy's a single mother, you know.
Wow.
So they're supporting their families, doing sports. There's a lot of levels and dynamics to what women do to persevere. You had raised the specter of women helping women, and that really is the crux of it. The promise of this is that sisterhood, that notion of paying it forward to the next generation, of being there to help explain what those things are. That's something Heather does now. She sits down and she says, hey, let me tell you, this is a business. If you don't think of this as a business, you will fail. Because you are dealing with sharks and you have to understand the language of sharks. You have to understand how to brand yourself, how to look forward for the opportunities that you can find, but more importantly, how you share that out with your sisters. In Heather's case, she introduced Amanda Serrano to Lou DiBella, who was her promoter. And once Heather had her title, she allowed Amanda Serrano to contest for it. Amanda won that. Fast forward 4 or 5 years to last summer, Amanda's an undisputed fighter, says, hey, Heather, hey, sis, let me let you up, and fights her in the biggest payday that Heather ever had. So that is where we are, helping each other, talking each other up. And yeah, listen, boxing can be mean. You know, we've all seen how boxers at a weigh-in or at a press conference will go at each other and say, you know, use the S word talk for what they say about each other. But when it comes to women's boxing, more often than not, they're just there to help each other up the ladder because nobody else is there to do it.
Well, you know what? I love hearing that because many times as women just over the different generations, we have been caught in this conditioning of sorts to kind of pave the way for ourselves and find a seat at the table because there's only so many seats. We need to uncondition and deprogram to be able to raise our other sisters up because seriously, if we don't do it, then who will? Because as you expressed and explained through an example here, these women are not finding the support that they need, and they're going to find it in sisterhood. You always do. And it's so important. And so that's why, like something like your book, like this podcast platform, it's about women. It's about women's voices. It's about supporting each other and how we can change that paradigm from being conditioned and having to find our seat at the table versus creating the table
Exactly
and
right.
inviting our sisters to the table.
That is exactly the case.
Let's talk about this new book. Let's talk about the promise of women's boxing, a momentous new era for the sweet science. Why sweet science? Tell us more.
Well, boxing has often been called the sweet science because there's the technical aspect of boxing, which is very specific to learn how to throw the array of punches. Folks used to be called the professor or the doctor of boxing, who were famous trainers back in the day. And what I refer to is, the 1800s, when bare knuckle boxing became very popular, and those who taught it and the women who actually performed boxing in the 1880s were learning in the same way, in the same manner. So that's the science part. And the sweet part is that it's an art. That when you're in the ring and you have two real professionals who really understand the sport, it's a dance. It's this miraculous occurrence of how people throw their punches, parry back and forth, duck out of the way, deal with the adversity of getting hit, how they maneuver across the ring. And that's why we call it the sweet science, because there's something very sweet when it's right on, when it just hits the right note between two fighters. And science, again, because it's a very technical sport. You cannot box effectively or proficiently without having that technical understanding of how to throw a punch and how to take a punch.
And this is what I love about your book, The Promise of Women's Boxing, a momentous new era for the sweet science, because it is a science. It is a dance. It is about energy and how to expend that energy, where to put it. And so as they're doing this dance, and as I was watching even as a young kid, and I've always really liked boxing, and people would ask, why do you like boxing? And I said, because there's so much more to it. And it always astounded me, like, how can these people do it? And then you get somebody like Mike Tyson, and you see these punches, these power punches, and you're just like, whoa.
Yeah.
It's just like
scary.
A mic drop, scary, right? And
yeah.
so
heavyweights, when two heavyweights go at it, your heart is always a little bit in your mouth.
Right.
Women are technicians. They also can be knockout artists. It's less so because there's less time in the rounds, and that's another whole discussion about round length and the politics of round length. The book covers the era from the Olympics in 2012 to today.
Gotcha.
And there was a lot of promise that came with the Olympics. It's like, finally, women's boxing is in the Olympics in 2012, the last sport that actually had both sexes now represented. So that was huge. Never mind that they had done it in 1904 at the Olympics in St. Louis, had done an exhibition. It just took 108 years. But with this finally in the Olympics in 2012, it's like the world's like, oh, cool. That means we're going to start getting on cards. We're going to be able to fight. It'll be great. And then, okay, what happened the morning after? Nothing.
Right.
Same old. Took really till 2016 when the Olympics was held in Rio for things to start to kind of open up more. Women started to appear on television again in the United States. It started to draw a lot of interest in the United Kingdom. Meanwhile, all the champions before that were a lot of from Argentina, from Mexico, Japan, countries you'd never think would sort of adapt to women's boxing, but it was a huge sport in those places. It's just the United States that's unfortunately a lot of the time been behind the times, if you will, even with Laila Ali's brilliance in the ring and her name recognition, which brought a lot of interest to the sport. Once she left, it kind of went into a dearth of opportunity, and certainly no one saw it on television anymore. But women continued to box and continued to box very brilliantly and had championship fights that were extraordinary that no one ever heard of. And those are the kinds of things that I've been teasing out since 2010 and did in my first book, A History of Women's Boxing, which was published in 2014, that looked at the sport, a 300-year arc, if you can believe that.
Wow.
Till 2012. And then this book kind of picks up on it, but really looks at the individual stories, the individual boxers, and how they have really push the sport forward for their boxing sisters.
Well, I absolutely love this, that you are, one, talking about the evolution of women in the sport, as well as the history, as well as the sisterhood, as well as it being a business. These are all very important aspects to really promote and get out there so that we can raise the awareness. Because yes, it happens in boxing, but this is not the only sport this is happening in. However, boxing is a unique sport. I mean, it is a serious contact sport. We can go down so many different areas and subjects to talk about related to boxing, and maybe why it was a little taboo for women to even be in the sport. There's all different kinds of things that we could think about, we could talk about, and I'm sure that this is just an absolutely fascinating book. So this will be out in June of 2024, just a month away. But by the time this airs, it'll be out. So where will people be able to find it?
You will be able to buy it online at Amazon and Barnes & Noble, any of your favorite online bookstores. I will have a book launch on June 15th at Gleason's Gym. Anyone who's in New York City on June 15th at 7:00 will be welcome to attend. I'm going to host a women's boxing forum with 5 former and current champions and 1 New York referee who was the first woman to become a professional referee in New York. Her name is Sparkle Lee. Was also one of the first boxers who ever boxed at Gleason's Gym. So I'm really excited to be able to have a platform for women to speak themselves about their experiences in the sport, where the sport is going, and the challenges that they face on a daily basis.
Well, I'm so excited for you. Now, let me ask you, what is the one thing, and I know there's multiple things in your book that you'd want people to kind of hold on to and walk away with. What is the one thing that you want them to gain from this book?
That women are serious. They are serious about what they do. And that translates into passion, into perseverance, and into a realm where they inspire each other and inspire those who are to come behind them.
Yeah.
Many women who box are also trainers because they can't earn a living any other way. And just having women in the gym is an inspiration. Having a trainer who's a champion herself is amazing. And I've had that experience training with Alicia Ashley. You just understand that what they have seen in the ring can translate to you, even if you're just a Saturday boxer like me. You know, I'm not competing at this point in my life. But for women who are interested in competition, having those women around you in the gym, seeing where they've come before, walking into Gleason's and seeing all the banners that say world champion is an inspiration in itself. And it's something that I feel very strongly needs to be amplified with those stories told.
I love that word, serious. So when you pick up this book, they're serious athletes. These women are serious athletes. And I would also piggyback on this by saying, not only are they serious, but it's something I always talk about called the PPI. They've got passion, they've got purpose, and they've got impact. That said, I'm going to ask you the last question. As we come to the close of the interview, if you were to give the listeners one tip about pursuing an interest that may appear different or unique, what would that be?
Don't be afraid. The only person holding you back is yourself. And that's just the fact of the matter. No one can hold you back. You're smart, you're beautiful, all of those things that you can say to yourself in the mirror. And the biggest thing is don't be afraid. Because if you don't, who will?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Malissa, for joining me on the Core Women podcast today.
Thank you.
You can follow Malissa on LinkedIn, on Instagram, and X at Girl Boxing Now and at melissa-smith.com.
Thank you for joining us on the Core Women podcast with Dr. Summer Watson. We're so glad you're here and would love to connect more with you. Find us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at Core Women and on Twitter at Core Women 1. For more about Core Women and Dr. Watson, visit corewomen.com. Want more support and resources for amazing women like you? Great! Join Dr. Watson and Jen Fontanilla at the Life, Love, and Money Collective, a Core Women production that aids in understanding the key traits that might be getting in the way of living a life that you are absolutely passionate about. Connect with Summer and Jen and find out more at thelifeloveandmoney.com.